We have to be very careful when studying in large scales like this. We're basically looking at numbers and some outcomes, and those outcomes are basically a 0 and a 1, and there's people that represents underneath.
Welcome to Collaborative Endeavors, a podcast about how experts from different areas of research come together to tackle big health challenges, leading to better therapies and healthier communities. In this episode, we meet one of CCTS's newest KL2 awardees in the Clinical and Translational Scholars, or CATS program. Dr. David Tofovic is an assistant professor in the Division of Cardiology, assistant program director for the Cardiovascular Disease Fellowship, and the director of education for the Center for Cardiovascular Research, as well as medical director for the Heart Center and Cardiac Ambulatory Services. On top of his many clinical hats, he is principal investigator for the UIC Sickle Cell Disease Cardiovascular Database, or SCD², and the UIC Multi-Ethnic Dilated Cardiomyopathy Registry. The latter is currently funded, in part, by a CCTS Pilot Grant Award. Fortunately, Dr. Tofovic found time to speak with me about his work on atrial fibrillation in sickle cell disease, which underpins his KL2 Mentored Career Development Award. We started the conversation with his professional background and what led him to the intersection of heart health and sickle cell disease.
If I had to ask myself where I saw myself in 10 years, I would have said this, but then how I got here is very different than I would have assumed I would get here. There's always that picture of a straight line to success, and that's never it. There's always these little roadblocks, and you learn these different tools and try these different experiments and things like that. My background is really in the study of rare diseases and the junction of kind of hematology and cardiovascular physiology. I did my training for fellowship here at the University of Illinois Chicago, where I did a cardiovascular disease fellowship and a general cardiology fellowship. Before that, I was at Case Western Reserve University. Man, I did, I think, a whirlwind tour of deep diving into clinical and translational research. I started at bench and translational in college, then went to kind of med school, focused on med school, continued some bench of translational work. And then in residency, really, I think, got the translational clinical bug. And, when I was done with residency and applying for cardiology, I knew that I wanted to do a research fellowship. And I knew that I wanted to study in particular sickle cell disease and the cardiovascular effects of sickle cell disease, which is what brought me here to UIC, which, we're a sickle cell disease center of excellence. And there's a great team of kind of hematologists and multidisciplinary team that got me more into sickle cell disease.
For those who may not be familiar with sickle cell disease, it is a genetically inherited disease where the body produces red blood cells shaped like crescents or sickles. These don't live as long as typical red blood cells, which leads to anemia, a low red blood cell count. The sickle shape also causes the cells to get stuck in blood vessels, blocking blood flow. Beyond anemia, symptoms include repeated infections and periodic episodes of pain. While the National Institutes of Health categorized sickle cell as a rare disease, Dr. Tofovic explained that this is far from an accurate depiction of the condition.
Rare diseases as a concept is a bit of a misnomer. That's somewhat what I've really devoted my life to is kind of diseases that are considered rare disease. But if you look at the continental United States, you're talking about probably 300 to 350,000 individuals with sickle cell disease, likely somewhere between 25 to 35 million across the world. So that's not a small number of human beings that are born with and live with sickle cell disease. The landscape in sickle cell disease is much more kind of heterogeneous or kind of varied. Different people get different treatments. Different people have different opportunities to care. Different people tolerate treatments differently. And so there's this wide range and wide spectrum of how that disease kind of even without treatment presents in people and how it affects their lives. But also when some people get treatment or can tolerate it and others can't, it kind of creates this big also disparity in how we're treating that disease and how well we're doing at controlling the symptoms and the effects of that disease. For a long time, we ignored things like this in rare diseases. Sickle cell disease being a great example of it, right? And these are people who have a lifelong condition, who have very frequent hospital use for many of them, and it's a debilitating condition in a lot of people. And there's others who are able to live more able lives, who are not as affected by the disease, but it still affects everyone who has it. And so I think the scientific community is finally starting to recognize that classically what we've thought of about diseases like this and about sickle cell disease as a whole is just not sufficient in how we study it. I think for a very long time it was considered a blood disorder. and it just affects the blood, and maybe it'll affect one organ or two organs. And I think myself and some of the work that I've done and others have done, and we've shown that it's a whole body illness and it affects multiple organs. I mean, for a long time we thought it didn't do anything to the heart. Well, no, that's not true. We thought, oh, the kidneys take hits. Yes, they do, but you're talking about neurologic disorders, you're talking about liver disorders, pain disorder. I mean, there's a lot that happens in the disease that hasn't really been touched on. On top of that, with some of those aforementioned treatments that I mentioned, people with sickle cell disease are now living longer. But what's really kind of unfulfilling to myself and as somebody who cares for individuals with sickle cell disease is that we've really plateaued in how long people are living who have sickle cell disease. And there's this huge gap still in between those individuals and kind of the general public that doesn't have it, that doesn't carry the genes for sickle cell disease. And so there's a lot of work to be done. For myself, the heart is my bread and butter. It's what I do for a living. And what we're starting to see now is that you're seeing these kind of two factors that are coming into play here. One is that sickle cell disease itself affects heart, and there's some unique changes that happen to it. Then you see that, now luckily, a lot of people with sickle cell disease are living kind of older than they were before. They're living much longer. Still, there's a gap in between kind of compared to the general population, but they're living much longer. And so we're starting to see kind of things that happen to the general in the general population start to creep in sickle cell disease. And then there's the interplay of those two things. And people haven't really started to study that and take a look. Sickle cell disease is challenging to study for a couple of reasons. You need a big enough group of people to be able to study something well enough. And in sickle cell disease for a long time, we just haven't had that. The studies that you look at in sickle cell disease, the kind of landmark ones, are still relatively few people. I mean, when you look at a heart disease trial, you're talking, 5, 10, hundreds of thousands in some case, and we just don't have that here. But what's exciting for us is that we're in this kind of new dawn and bustling age of technology that allows us to kind of interconnect systems and process these larger bundles and larger groups of data now. So what we're looking to do with kind of my project in particular is we're focusing our cohort here at UIC. And then we're going to hopefully expand this in the coming future to a couple of multi-site groups to see if we can really kind of build a robust data usage for everybody.
Dr. Tofovic described his interdisciplinary mentor team and how their respective expertise helps to fill gaps in his professional training.
Just as a whole, there's not a lot of heart doctors that look at sickle cell disease. I think that there's only literally a handful of us in the entire world that are doing it. I've been very fortunate because the sickle cell disease community is still smaller, particularly in the continental United States. Right now, I'm focusing particularly on arrhythmias or abnormal heart rhythms in sickle cell disease. But I've had the wonderful opportunity to partner with and really get trained by some of kind of the who's who of people in this. So my primary mentor, Dr. Dabar, who is kind of a world-renowned expert in atrial fibrillation and the genetics behind atrial fibrillation, the physiology behind atrial fibrillation, and Dr. Santosh Saraf. He's kind of a very well-respected expert in the kidney effects of sickle cell disease and sickle cell disease as a whole. So UIC was just this little hub for me to just kind of come in, swoop in my lonely self here and really just be able to interact, let alone get mentored by some phenomenal human beings who are really pioneers in their fields. What that brings in and what I hope to develop, not just for my career, but I think for studying sickle cells as a whole, is this not only awareness, but this toolkit for myself and for sickle cell disease, as well as this database and kind of our approach and what we're looking at and how we're looking at, and then hopefully gain insight into why certain things are happening in sickle cell disease to the heart. And then obviously from there, the end goal is always how do we prevent it or how do we treat it when it happens? My work is very multidisciplinary and collaborative. And I think in cardiology for a very long time has been focused, on classic heart conditions. It's important to recognize that it's a wide field. Now that we have kind of these intersections with other fields in medicine that are starting to get very exciting. Cardio-oncology, women's health now is a very big issue. And sickle cell disease, I think, still has a lot more that can, there's a lot more that can be done there for heart doctors. There's a lot to do and a lot of work and a lot of good. I mean, you have the potential to impact 25 to 35 million people worldwide. That's huge.
Thinking about the translational science underpinning this study, I asked Dr. Tofovic if aspects of the project, including the SCD² database, could be generalized or repurposed for those studying other diseases in the sickle cell patient population, or even other rare diseases.
So I think that's one of the major goals, and that's why my team and I and my mentors and everybody else who's been involved has spent so much time in building the SCD² database. what we're hoping to do here is to expand that and to keep and preserve it for kind of later generations, as well as for collaborators at other sites and within our own institution. The hope is also that some of the methods that we're using to approach the study of sickle cell disease do get validated within our data set, and then we can expand those to other data sets for further validation. I mentioned the challenge of studying rare diseases is there's not as many patients as a single site. Sickle cell disease also has a lot of other challenges. Individuals sometimes will jump in between centers because when a crisis happens, they have to go immediately for care. There is also a very much the high influence of social determinants of health in sickle cell disease. Many of these patients do not get, the access to care that more affluent individuals will receive. And so the goal here is to really just create this sphere of this is how we can approach this group. These are the toolkits that we can use. We want others to eventually use these tools and these toolkits. And informatics is not a bad way to approach it. And also the second half of this is creating a biobank or a biorepository of samples from those that decide to participate or would like to participate within our study. Those are samples that are then going to be available to collaborators, to future generations, to individuals at other sites to answer other questions. Getting better knowledge of how does sickle cell disease affect the lungs and what is happening in the kidneys. I'm one person. My team is still only a handful to 2 handfuls of individuals, even with, trainees and mentees and research coordinators and everybody who comes in and works. We're still a small team in the grand scheme of, scientific inquiry in the world. So that is 100% the goal.
As we concluded our conversation, I asked Dr. Tofovic about how he hopes to leverage the KL2 award to advance his career as a translational scientist, and what that career might look like a decade from now.
Number one, it's to create this both clinical and sample biorepository for myself to study, for others, collaborators and future generations to study, I think, and then to build up the methods to how to analyze it. That is exactly what the KL2 is funding. So as I mentioned earlier, I have a very much bench to translational research, but when you study rare diseases in 2024, that's just not sufficient. You've got better tools that help bring in patients, to help study patients longitudinally, to make sure that we get a more complete picture of what's happening to those individuals. And so for myself, what I really hope kind of my toolkit is one of twofold. One is just a deeper understanding of the methods utilized to really recognize the patterns and clustering of what's happening. And is there groups? Are we seeing phenomenon in these individuals that we haven't recognized before? So along that route, I'm developing kind of my own informatics, health informatics, and bioinformatics background further. The general saying is bad data in means bad research out or bad data out. And we have to be very careful when studying in large scales like this, that we're basically looking at numbers and some outcomes, and those outcomes are basically a 0 and a 1, and there's people that represents underneath. On top of that, we have to be very careful about the data that we're analyzing and how that data is collected, because most of our data goes through someone's hands, and that data itself has bias, and that data and how it's kind of viewed afterwards can also have bias. And as we get into this blossoming age of informatics, we really have to be cognizant and aware that the systems that we're developing are also a representation of how we model those systems and how we develop those systems, and that they can continue and perpetuate the biases that we have. Where I see myself in 10 years is really just kind of the natural progression of where I am currently. I wear a couple of different hats within my own division and in this university, but those hats still tailor into bringing and expanding clinical and translational and bench research opportunities to those who haven't been studied, right? Who haven't gotten access to that, because with every new tool that we develop, with every progress I've made in science, if it doesn't get applied to everybody, then you're missing opportunities, right? So we keep talking about a healthcare gap, that certain individuals get more access to care, but the same thing is happening in the research world, right? There's a research gap. Certain individuals get access to research opportunities, the ability to participate in research, and others don't. So my career goal has always been to study that. And, I would say the overarching goal of mine it's always been to develop kind of what I call minimally invasive or minimally obtrusive methods for research participation, and that are culturally competent, that are kind of socially competent, to make sure that we adequately represent everybody within research. That's exactly what I want to do. I am almost positive that I will still be working on sickle cell disease and sickle cell disease research in 10 years. I don't think sickle cell disease is going away anywhere anytime soon. Unfortunately, we still have a lot of work to do with it.
Collaborative Endeavors is written and produced by me, Lauren Rieger, on behalf of the Center for Clinical and Translational Science, aka the CCTS, at the University of Illinois, Chicago. To learn more about Dr. David Tofovic and the CCTS's KL2 CATS and CATS affiliate program, visit the links in our show notes. The CCTS is supported by the National Institutes of Health's National Center for Advancing Translational Science through their Clinical and Translational Science Award. Opinions expressed by guests of the show are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of myself, the CCTS, or our funding agencies. You can find more episodes of Collaborative Endeavors on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and Google Podcasts. While we do not monetize this podcast, we do love positive feedback. If you like what you hear, go ahead and give us a 5-star rating to help spread the word. To learn more about how you can work with the CCTS to make a positive impact on the health and well-being of our community, visit ccts.uic.edu or follow us on X at UIC_CCTS.
Welcome to Community Level, the podcast where public health research meets real-world impact. Brought to you by the Community Health Sciences Division of the University of Illinois Chicago School of Public Health. I'm Dr. Kalechi Bay-Lamberts, your host, and each month we'll bring you in-depth interviews with leading academic researchers, community leaders, and organizations making a difference in our communities. Discover the groundbreaking projects and innovative solutions that are shaping the future of public health. Their personal stories and professional journeys that led these experts and community leaders and scholars and students to their vital work. At Community Level, we go beyond the data to explore the human side of public health research and community initiatives. Whether you're a student, professional, or just passionate about making a difference, this podcast is for you. Join us as we bridge the gap between research and practice, one episode at a time. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform and follow us on social media for the latest updates. Let's make a positive impact together at the Community Level.